Good afternoon. Apologies, we're experiencing some technical difficulties, but we're now ready to begin. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for the first in a series of webinars covering the findings and implications of Prevention Centre research projects. For those of us who are new to the Prevention Centre, we are a national collaboration of researchers, policymakers and practitioners who are working together to identify new ways of understanding what works and what doesn't to prevent lifestyle, chronic health problems in Australia. In keeping with our Centre's commitment to reconciliation and respect, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we are presenting from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating today. My name is Ainsley Burgess and I am a member of the communications team at the Prevention Centre, and it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gary Sachs today, who is presenting on how Australian governments can achieve best practice in obesity policy. Dr. Sachs is a Senior Research Fellow at the Global Obesity Centre at Deakin University. His primary research interests include influences on policy making and evaluation of policies for improving the healthiness of the food supply and the political influence of the food industry. Now, in terms of how today's webinar is going to work, if you experience any technical problems throughout the webinar, please call Redback. The number should be on your screen. And you can also submit any questions and comments at any time by typing into the chat box, which should be on the left of your screen. So I'll now hand over to Gary.
Thanks, Ainsley, and thank you for joining in this webinar. What I'm going to cover today is presenting the results of a Prevention Centre project that I was leading, and we completed it earlier this year. The project set out to assess how well Australian governments are doing in their efforts to create healthy food environments and address obesity. So I know many of you in the audience were involved in this project. I particularly want to thank the government representatives who were part of this project, as well as all the people that participated in the assessment process. As I say, I know a lot of you are online today, and it's good to have you with us. So what I'll do is give a bit of a background to the project. I'll present the main findings, and I'll also discuss how some of the follow-up to the project when we followed up how things have gone subsequent to the release of the results. So some brief background. I'm sure most of you on the call would be aware that unhealthy diets and obesity are among the leading contributors to poor health in Australia. And there's actually a really good understanding of what we need to do to fix the problem. So WHO have a whole series of reports, I'm just flicking through them there, which all have long lists of recommendations of what governments need to be doing to create healthy food environments. There's also, WHO have targets in place for NCD prevention. There's global monitoring frameworks. So it's a really good idea of what needs to be done. But we also know that internationally, countries have been pretty slow to take up these recommendations. And so that's led to a focus on accountability. I'm part of a network called Informus, which looks to monitor what's going on around food globally, and by monitoring things, try and hold governments and the private sector to account for their role in trying to make things a bit better. So Informus has developed a tool called the Food Epi, which is the Healthy Food Environment Policy Index, and it's a tool for benchmarking how governments are going in their efforts to create healthy food environments. I'll go through the details of the tool briefly. It's got two components, policies and infrastructure support, and in each of those there's several domains, and these are the areas where the evidence shows the things that governments should be doing, so areas where there should be policy action. And for each of those domains, there's a number of indicators and good practice statements. And so what the Food Epi tool does is compare how governments are going in each of those areas against good practice. The tool's been applied in a number of countries, and by the end of the year it will have been applied in about 10 countries, all doing the same thing that we've done in this project. I'll just very briefly give you a sense of what those areas are, which I'm sure many of you would be familiar with. The policy areas, I won't read them all, I'll just give you a sense of it. There's food composition, standards and targets, food labeling. There's a whole lot of policies that the evidence shows government should have. Restricting marketing of unhealthy food across various media. Food prices, there's a whole range of government policies there. And you can read some of the others around food provision, food retail, and trade. There's also a whole lot of areas of infrastructure support. This is government policy that helps support those policies we saw on the previous slide. Things like leadership, good governance processes, good monitoring of various aspects of food environments, strong funding for NCD prevention and nutrition, platforms for interaction and support for communities. So the idea is to see how government's going in each of those and in comparison to best practice. And so that brings us to the aim of this project that I'm reporting on. The idea, as I've said, is really to try and hold governments accountable for their role in creating healthy food environments, and also through the process of doing so, of bringing the public health community and government groups together. The idea is to increase knowledge and collaboration in the area. So we started off by documenting all the policy details in each of the states and territories and for the federal government. And that, it probably is no surprise to you to know that that was a really big job. It's not a matter of just jumping on a website and seeing what government policy is in each of those 45 areas. It took about 8 months of work, and particularly to the government representatives who helped us along there. I know it was probably at times a real pain with us asking questions of what the policy details are. And all the policy details across those 42 areas for each jurisdiction is up on that website, foodpolicyindex.org.au. We then convened workshops in each capital city. Altogether we had just over 100 people who got together to assess how each government was going in each of those indicators. And so I'll now present the results. We won't be able to go through all the results, and if people want the full reports are available at that website I gave before. So here's the overview for the federal government. These are those policy domains. Just at a glance, you can see there's a range of colors there. So the federal government was rated as doing really well in some areas, particularly food labeling, and the fact that the GST doesn't apply to fresh food. It scored Australia a nice green mark there. But there's also some areas where they're not doing so well, particularly in the area of restricting marketing of junk food to kids. So that scorecard sort of gives an overview of how Australia is going compared to best practice. Here's the second page of the federal government assessment. These are those infrastructure support domains. Again, you can see a mix. Australia is seen as leading the world in some areas. Our dietary guidelines are seen as among the best globally. Also, the fact that Australia regularly monitors population body weight was a big win. But I guess some other areas where Australia was rated as falling behind best practice was that there isn't a national nutrition plan, and also best practice is to have an independent health promotion agency, and I'm sure everyone on the call knows that we don't have one nationally. Part of the process was also to come up with recommendations for the government, and so I've just put up here the recommendations for the federal government. You can see these are the top 7 recommendations. The first couple are around establishing obesity prevention as a national priority, and having a national nutrition plan. And I should say that these recommendations are in line with a whole lot of other reports that have come out by other public health groups with similar sort of recommendations. A key recommendation is to have a levy on sugar-sweetened drinks and to have really strong restrictions on the marketing of junk food to kids. The fifth recommendation there is to make the Health Star rating scheme mandatory, and some indicators, some recommendations there about monitoring and having strong targets in place. As I say, the full set of recommendations are on that website, foodpolicyindex.org.au, and I'm sure people can, if you haven't already looked at those reports, you can have a look. Also, just to flag, there are recommendations, similar recommendations and scorecards for each state. So there's just a picture of the Victorian one. I won't go through the detail, but just to give you a sense. So I know there's people from all around the country on this webinar today. So if you haven't already, you can look at the report card for your state or territory. I will just go through a brief comparison of how the states went against each other, and this is really just to give kind of a sense of how things are going in each state. Again, if you just at a glance, you can see there's each state is doing well in some areas and less well in others, and there is quite a bit of variety if you kind of go across. You can see quite a variety across how the states and territories are going. I'll just point to a few examples. Menu labeling is probably an easy one for us to get our heads around. At the time we did this, there were four of the states and territories had menu labeling regulations. Victoria was just going through the process of getting that approved. That's why they're not quite at a green light there. And the other states and territories don't have regulations in place. So I guess what these scorecards are showing is just at a glance, it can give you an idea of which states are seen to be leading and which states may be lagging behind. Just highlight one other example there. New South Wales and Victoria rating really well in their support for public sector settings, so schools and hospitals and workplaces to implement healthy food policies. And there I've just highlighted planning laws. Queensland and Tasmania are leading the way there in that their planning frameworks do allow for health to be a consideration for planning, whereas the other states, that's a whole lot more difficult. Here's the scorecard for that infrastructure support component. Again, you can see a whole mix of colors. I'll just talk through a couple. That top line, the ACT was recognized through this project as having really strong leadership for population nutrition and obesity prevention. And I think the way that the ACT approaches this is really an example perhaps for other states and territories to follow. And I've just highlighted the social marketing campaigns where I'm sure many of you know WA have really been a great leader there through their Live Lighter campaign, and they scored highest among the states and territories there. Again, I guess I just wanted to give the sense that through the scorecarding exercise, while that it really maybe can show where the leading examples in Australia are and indicate that if we had perhaps a more coherent approach to policy making across the states and territories, we could see a whole lot more blue and green lights there. So this project was around, the aim of it was accountability. So I think it's important to talk about how this project has been received. We had a launch of these results in February, which some of you may have seen in the media. The Herald Sun in Victoria led with the story that even though our report had all in all about 50 recommendations, they decided to jump on the expelled junk food from schools as the key message, and that did get a lot of attention in the media. We had all the main TV networks picked up the story, as well as all the major radio and online platforms. Barnaby Joyce and a whole lot of other politicians got in on the act. So the report certainly got noticed at the time. We also, on the day of the launch, had formal responses to the launch from the Health Minister. you won't be able to read the detail there, but the gist of it was, so this report, as I've just explained, was about creating healthy food environments. The Health Minister's response was saying that this report failed to take into account all the wonderful things the government's been doing for physical activity, so that was the flavour of their response. The opposition put out a release on the day of the report, which said that obesity wake-up call for the Prime Minister, and the Food and Grocery Council also put out a response talking about the great things they've been doing for the food supply. So I guess from an accountability point of view, we did get a good hit on the day of the launch. The project also followed up. Each government, we wrote to the Health Minister and the Premier or Chief Minister in each jurisdiction and sent them a copy of the report. And most of the jurisdictions responded with formal letters back to the project team. In this, again, I don't expect you to read the detail, but the Health Minister replied with, again, more details of the physical activity programs that the government supports, but also indicating some other broader obesity prevention measures. The Premier of Queensland responded with a very detailed 4-page response. I think theirs was the most detailed response to this report, and each of the other jurisdictions also replied to the letter. So this is part of our efforts to try increase accountability for action in this area and to really flag the issues to the government leaders. Also, I just thought it worthwhile reporting on how participants viewed this process. So we did a survey of all the 100 people who participated in the assessment process, as well as the government participants who helped us along with collecting all that policy information. You can see that the non-government participants and the government participants felt that their knowledge of food and nutrition really increased as a result of the project, which was one of our key aims, so that was pleasing to see. The government participants, you can see the question there, participation in the project was a productive use of their time. Probably less than half of the government participants felt that. I think that reflects the big burden of collecting all that policy detail. But hopefully now that we've got it all, if we do this project again, it might be a little bit less burdensome on them. They might feel it was less burdensome. Again, a bit of a difference there when we asked questions of the non-government participants about whether they felt this was likely to lead to beneficial change. The vast majority said yes, but the government participants were probably a little bit more, maybe a bit more skeptical. I guess time will tell. Just here's some quotes from government participants on their views on how the project went. Again, bearing in mind our aim was to try and increase accountability in this area, so these are really pertinent quotes. Good to see that second quote, that government participant saying overall it was a useful exercise and they've used the findings to inform ministers about what we should be doing. The third quote, that the Food AP project has confirmed their priorities and is being used to support their proposed plans. So that's really heartening to hear. But then those last two quotes I think are really important. It's around saying that yes, there was a initial media hit and a lot of interest when the reports were released, but whether that will translate to significant reform is uncertain. And I guess the last quote is also similarly along those lines, to say that it would be good to be able to use these results to push for that accountability and to push for action beyond the release of the results. I guess part of the idea of this webinar is to gain more exposure for the results, but I'd welcome comments and questions about how we can use these results to generate some more action. And I guess I'll just end by some take-home messages to sum up. It's clear that there is a wide range of actions that each government in Australia, states, territories and the federal government can take to address unhealthy diets and obesity. Australia is definitely leading the way in some policies in the area, but there's definitely some areas where we're really falling behind other countries. I feel like I've said the word accountability so many times in this presentation, but really there needs to be a greater focus. This is a crucial public health issue, and we really need to push for government to take more action in this area. So I'll now hand back to Ainsley for the Q&A.
Thanks, Gary. As a communications professional, especially in research communication, these insights are invaluable. I'm sure you'll agree and might have comments as well. So we now have time for questions. Please submit them in the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen if you haven't already done so. And while the Q&A is on, we'll also have a short evaluation survey that will pop up on your screen. So please fill it out. That will help us plan future webinars, which will be more tailored to your needs. So look, I'll hand back to Gary now. We've got a couple of, quite a few questions in the chat box, so we'll start off.
Yeah, so I'll just scroll through to see some of these questions. There's one question, I'll read it out first. It says, how did you get governments to agree to have their policies critiqued in this way, and can I talk about the process? I suppose that the first answer to that is there was a lot of support from the Prevention Centre. As Ainsley explained, the Prevention Centre is a collaboration between governments and researchers and other public health groups. And so there were already strong relationships with many of the state and the federal government involved in this project. So that helped the engagement. We also took a lot of time to explain to governments about the project. We try to give a lot of time for governments to consider our request to be involved and to collect the policy details. But fortunately, we had really strong support from government and really good engagement. We recognized that this was a burdensome process on government representatives, and we try to allow plenty of time for that process. I might move on to some other questions. There's one here around a sugar tax. The question is, how do we follow the UK's lead and implement a sugar tax, and what is required to get government buy-in? So it's true that there's lots of countries around the world that have now implemented a sugar tax. The UK is one of them. That's about to come into place in the next year or so. Mexico and a whole lot of other countries have done so. My feeling is that the momentum is really building. If you just follow the media on that, the sort of conversation has changed from critique of the nanny states to much more serious conversations about how a tax might work, and there is strong community support for this. So my view is it's just a matter of time, and as a public health community, we just need to keep advocating for that. I'm just, again, scrolling through some questions. There's a lot of questions, so just give me a second to just pick one from my screen. There's a question about the best practice recommendations. The question is, can you tell us more about the development of the best practice recommendations? I can. So those were developed by...
Testing. This is a test. Testing. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2.
Sounds like they're just testing the fire alarm in here, which I don't think we expected, but hopefully that won't interfere too much. So the best practice recommendations were developed by Informus. This exercise, the food epi, has been conducted in up to 10 countries now. That helped us pull together some of the best practice recommendations. Also, there's various groups. The World Cancer Research Fund has a database called the Nourishing Database, which highlights best practice in a whole lot of the areas we're looking at through here. And through Informus, there's a network of public health experts around the world who helped us pull these recommendations together. The idea is really to demonstrate actual countries that have actually implemented these policies. We were trying not to say the ideal gold standard ivory tower type recommendations. We were really grounding them in what countries around the world have actually been able to achieve in each of these areas. I'll just scroll through and find another question. There's a question about where we would like to take the project next and the next steps. So I think getting the results out there is an important part, and we have been, as I said, we wrote to each of the ministers around the country to highlight these results and the priority recommendations. And I think it's important that we repeat this exercise. So New Zealand have just completed their second round of the Food EPI report, and I think that's really important to show where progress has been made. So New Zealand first did the exercise about 3 years ago, and they've just repeated it now. And so you can really see in New Zealand, when you look at their scorecards, how things have changed over the last 3 years. And for keeping governments accountable, I think it's important to show that progress. And so we'll be hoping to repeat that process in a couple of years. I'll just look for some more questions flashing up on the screen. There's a question about physical activity. So while we did, this project was about addressing policies for creating healthy food environments, and that side of the obesity policy equation. Physical activity, as we know, is a really important issue, and as I understand it, the physical activity community is thinking about similar exercises, but as yet there's nothing underway, but it's really important, and it would be great to include physical activity in future exercises like this. There's a question about whether the food industry has responded to this work, and so I did flash up that there was a formal response from the Australian Food and Grocery Council to this report, which I have to say didn't really get at the details of this report. The FCTC just highlighted the standard things they like to highlight, which is that they do a great job in creating a safe food supply in Australia, and that they are a strong industry, but they didn't address this report in detail. So that's all I have on that. There's a question about whether I think this will contribute to progress on the national nutrition policy. Well, I certainly hope so. This report had a strong call for a national nutrition policy. There was a heap of groundwork done in the development of a national nutrition policy. In our discussions as part of this project with the federal government, they did indicate that it was an area that could see some progress, but I'm not sure of the detail of that. But our strong recommendation was to develop a national nutrition policy, and hopefully that comes through. There's a question about local governments, and I know many of you in the audience are from local government, and so there's a question about is there a similar tool that could be used with local government. So in New Zealand they have developed a customized version of this tool which could be used for local government. I don't know all the details of that, but through Informus, if there is scope to perhaps tailor this for local government. I think we'd have to have a look at what's in the power of local governments to do, but certainly the aim of laying out what each level of government can do and then sussing out how they're going and coming up with recommendations, it feels to me like a really powerful way of having a single conversation about the issue and bringing together people to discuss the issue. So I'd welcome discussions about how we might apply this at the local government level. There's a question about whether the letters from the ministers are available online. They're not at the moment, but I can certainly look at making them available online. So thanks for that question, and we'll look into doing that. There's a question about is the timing right for an FCTC-like approach to obesity or nutrition? So that's the FCTC is the Framework Convention on Tobacco, which is it like a treaty or it's a convention at the WHO level. It sets out really strong commitments for governments to follow. That's in the area of tobacco. I know there has been a lot of debate at the global level about whether a similar convention for diets could be developed and could be applied. There's varying views on that. There's some that think it would be a really positive step to take, and others that think it might be a bit of a distraction. So there's varying support for that. But certainly, at the moment, the Australian government, as with other governments, have made commitments to implement those recommendations that are flashed up early on in the presentation. And I suppose while they commit to that at the global level, it's about how it gets implemented at the national level. And so it would again point to this need for accountability, for highlighting what needs to be done and pushing government to take action in those areas. There's a question about how I suggest public servants can support governments to be more accountable. That's a really good question. I suppose we hope that these reports that we've produced could be used for internal advocacy within government to show that here's a report and recommendations coming out from non-government experts in the area with key recommendations and using that to try to generate action. But I think there's probably others who are more qualified to talk about how to generate government action internally. So I'd welcome further discussion on that. There's a question about the fat shaming debate. How do we challenge the fat shaming debate to focus on healthy weight? I suppose that is a very important issue. What we've tried to focus on in this report is the environment. So how do we create healthy food environments, which is taking the responsibility and the focus away from the individual. And so that's very much our approach here. There clearly is some role for individual responsibility in this area, but the main focus is on creating healthy food environments, and that's how the language we used in this report. There's a question around food labeling, and there was a question around the health star rating system and how at the moment it's a voluntary scheme. As you know, it's quite widely applied, but it's still only on a relatively small percentage of products. And so the question was, what are our recommendations in the meantime, while we perhaps wait for the health star rating to be made mandatory? I think the focus of this report is showing that there's a whole range of things government can do. Food labeling is one of them, but there's also scope for changing the availability of healthy foods, for restricting marketing of junk foods, changing prices, education, social marketing campaigns. In the area of food labeling specifically, the view of this assessment was that the health star rating system is a really strong initiative. It compares well to what governments are doing internationally, and the push was to make that mandatory over time. There was a question about whether we've considered meeting personally with the health ministers to put out these reports. I'd be very happy to meet with the health ministers. I did in our letters to the health ministers, we did make ourselves available to do that, and I suppose we can follow up on that request, so thanks for that suggestion. There's a question which is a really important one about it reads, based on our experience conducting this in Australia, are we recommending any changes to the tool? And so this tool, as I've mentioned, by the end of this year will have been carried out in about 10 countries. And we do have a process of evaluation and considering how the tool is working. Mexico actually did the assessment online, whereas we met, all the workshop participants met in person. So that's one consideration to maybe make it a little bit less burdensome on participants. Mexico did also bring the group back together to do the prioritization of recommendations, so they still had that interaction, and that's something we could consider. Canada have done a very similar exercise to us in comparing each of the provinces in Canada, and they might have some learnings about how we might be able to do that better. So yes, we are learning, and we're trying to make this as easy and as useful as possible, so we will be putting a lot of thought into that. There's a question around the evidence on sugary drinks tax and whether we think whether the evidence does show whether that would work in an Australian setting. Thanks for that question. So there is actually really good evidence coming out of the countries and the states in the US that have implemented a sugary drinks tax, and the evidence there clearly shows that the tax works as expected. People have shifted from sugary drinks to mostly water, and so consumption is down in response to the tax, which is as we expected. And I don't think there's any reason to think Australia would be different to other countries in that respect. We know that Australians respond to change in price, and there's every indication that it would have an impact. Recent modelling has also, I know a lot of people have flagged the potential impact of a sugary drinks tax on low-income groups. There's some modelling papers that have recently come out which shows that the impact would be not as well, that low-income groups would benefit probably more from the tax due to the health impacts on those groups, and the financial impact on low-income groups would be very minimal. So I think there's a lot of evidence showing that a sugary drink tax would really work in Australia, and as long as it's part of the broader solution, it would be, this report shows it's a top priority. There's a question about whether there's a website that we can access the reports for the other countries where the assessment has been conducted. I'd need to check the Informus website to make sure that all those reports are up there. So it's informus.org has those details, but I need to just check if all those reports are up there. So thanks for that suggestion. It has been done in the UK, New Zealand, Thailand at the moment. The Canadian one's just being finalised at the moment, as the other countries. So they'll be up on the Informus site. There's a question about whether there's a role for the public to support these initiatives, and that's a really important question, and I know community action and community support for these things is really crucial. I suppose that's something that we probably need to think through about how to bring the community voice together in support of these. But certainly members of the public are welcome to write to their local minister, and also support the NGOs working in this area to lend support for these initiatives. But that's a really good question. Thank you. There's a question about how do we get prevention better funded at a federal level, and I know that that's an area that the Prevention Centre is really working on to really try to describe the importance of prevention, the business case for prevention, and to advocate for that at a federal level. So your question's a really good one, and I know the Prevention Centre are on the case. And maybe I'll take one more question. So there's a final question on what I personally am going to do next in response to this project. I suppose my main thing is putting in a grant application to try to do this again, but also I'm happy to have conversations with, particularly for the people who work within state and territory governments and the federal government. I'd really welcome the opportunity to have more detailed discussions about the results. So I'm open to invitations to come present, and also, as I say, the Informist group is looking to refine the tools so that if we do this again, it would hopefully be nice and quick and easy to do, and we can learn from other countries' experience and how they've used this tool. Might hand over to Ainsley now.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for your questions as well. We really appreciate the discussion. That's all for today. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But to find out about any future webinars that we will have on coming up in the rest of 2017, and also our latest resources, we'll also have a fact sheet on taxing sugary drinks coming out very shortly, hopefully in the next 2 weeks. So to find out and get a hold of all those latest resources, the best way is probably to visit our homepage. And on the homepage, you can subscribe to our bi-monthly newsletter, which is called The Chronicle. We'll also send out the survey, so if you haven't had a chance to fill it out or it hasn't popped up on your screen yet, I think it's showing now. But we will send it out to all participants after today. And I'd just like to say thank you for all of you for joining us, and a special thanks to Gary also for all his insights on the research process and about the collaboration for his project. We